an important foreign policy success for Ukraine. Not final yet, but things have finally moved off dead center. I'm talking about the hellish U.S. sanctions against Russia and the countries that are helping it. At the end of the week, the U.S. Senate finally voted for Lindsey Graham's long-suffering bill, which was registered 16 months ago. During this time, Graham's bill went through several revisions, numerous negotiations with the White House, constant delays, and even the death of its author. So what does it provide for? First, 100% tariffs for the 5 largest buyers of Russian oil and gas, and for the 5 countries that are most actively helping Russia bypass sanctions. In the first draft, it was 500%. This is not an automatic punishment. Trump himself will decide whether to impose these tariffs and against whom. But as for the main part of the sanctions contained in this bill, Trump will be forced to implement them, albeit with the option to suspend some of them. These are restrictions against the Russian political elite, oligarchs, banks, state-owned enterprises, as well as against the shadow fleet. It is not for nothing that I clarified that the success is not yet final. The vote in the Senate is a very important, but only the first step. For the bill to turn into hellish sanctions, it still needs to be supported by the House of Representatives, which will return from recess at the end of August, and then signed by the U.S. President. So let's keep our fingers crossed. But that's not the only good news from Washington this week. The U.S. State Department has authorized Turkey to sell American weapons from its arsenal to Ukraine, including 70 ATACMS ballistic missiles with cluster warheads. They won't reach Moscow, but for destroying the ballistic Iskander launchers in Russia's border regions, they are exactly what's needed. We will talk about this later in the episode, because right now, Sophia Cholis will tell us about the main strikes of the week against the occupiers.
40 days of forced peace continued. A strike-filled week deep behind enemy lines.
This is, well, the place where they make unmanned aerial vehicles and teach how to operate them.
Oil crisis, burning warehouses, and the helplessness of Russian air defense.
Russians will pay more for the fact that their goods will burn in warehouses.
A new phase of the Defense Forces operation.
You wake up every morning and see burned, burned, burned.
And how are the new Ukrainian sanctions preparing a real heart attack for the Russian economy?
And it is already burned in my memory, well, more than 12 times, that's for sure.
And why will the losses from these strikes hit the Kremlin grandfather's pocket personally?
Part of the funds goes to the family, not the relatives, but specifically to Putin's family.
All the hidden meanings and details of this impactful week are right now on Facts of the Week. Amidst the colorful palette of burning hues in Russia, it's already hard to guess at first glance what exactly is on fire this time. A military plant, a logistics center, or another oil refinery. These are the shots of a fresh attack on the Seasren oil refinery on August 8th. The Defense Forces delight us with new hits every day. The day before, our drones even visited Yekaterinburg, making Ukrainian fans of long-range birds worry for a few minutes. At first, the fire just didn't want to start over the logistics warehouse of the now famous Wildberries. Only a thin column of smoke was visible in the sky, but our stubborn birds quickly fixed that.
That's it. It's burning. It'll smoke up now, and that's it. The warehouse is gone.
All these explosive episodes of the last few days are not just isolated flashes of initiative. This is a logical continuation of the 40-day operation by the SBU and the Defense Forces, the formal term of which expired this week. However, it seems our birds just can't stop enjoying flying to Russia.
Ukraine has effectively moved from isolated, high-profile operations deep within Russian territory to a systematic impact on the enemy's entire military-economic system. If we take the strikes, for example, from this week already, we are effectively counting from when that 40-day period ended on August 4th. This does not mean at all that the campaign is over. That's one thing. On the contrary, it has simply moved into the next phase.
Instead of isolated, loud jabs, Ukraine has launched an assembly line for methodically burning out Russia's potential. The Kremlin's main fuel pump has been caught in this assembly line. Without exaggeration, a striking example is August 6th in Yaroslavl. One of the aggressor state's oil refineries came under fire.
The Yaroslavl one is among the largest in the Russian Federation. It's in the top 5, and it has already burned, as far as I can remember, well, more than 12 times, that's for sure.
So the residents of Yaroslav, having learned from bitter experience, knew exactly what to do the morning after another hit.
Everyone is already mostly filling up jerry cans.
But jerry cans and kilometer-long lines won't save Russia from the systemic fuel famine created by our long-range strikes. Just look at the scale of this picture. Out of 26 Russian oil refineries hit by Ukrainian drones, only 8 have been able to fully recover. 7 giant plants are still completely shut down, and another 11 are operating at only a third or half of their capacity. On average, the attacked facilities lost 45% of their capacity, driving oil refining down to a 20-year low. Ufa has once again made it onto the list of critical targets. August 5th turned out to be an incredibly fiery morning for the local oil workers.
Girls, it's all black over there.
The consequences of such regular visits by Ukrainian birds have long since gone beyond purely military reports.
They are currently facing a shortage. Well, again, this is an assessment by Reuters and other think tanks. So there's a shortage of approximately 30 to 40% for their domestic consumption, meaning we have destroyed, well, a significant amount of their oil refining capacity.
But an oil heart attack is only half the trouble for the Kremlin and just one piece of our puzzle. Remember the footage of the burning logistics warehouse in Yekaterinburg? It is perfectly complemented by another hit. Krasny Bor, Leningrad Oblast.
Whoa, look, right there.
It is August 4th today, although it seems the Russians themselves are actually operating on a slightly different calendar system than the one we are currently using.
The 15th warehouse. And good morning again.
Groundhog Day, where problems for the Russians just keep piling up.
Today, the 16th warehouse is burned. This is Tula. It's flaring up more and more.
It's even reaching the point of hysteria and sound advice that the Kremlin won't be able to follow.
God, someone put a net over it, set up an anti-aircraft gun, or at the very least, set up a Katyusha. Just give this guy some kind of chance at survival.
It's no longer possible to hide the scale of the logistical chaos.
You wake up every morning and see it burned, it burned, it burned.
At least 18 warehouses. The geography stretches over 2,000 kilometers. Systematic strikes have disabled over 20% of the retailer's total warehouse space, and the marketplace's massive $17 billion debt threatens to trigger a chain reaction and collapse Russia's largest state banks. But it needs to reach not just the Russians, but Putin as well. And it seems this is another key through his clan's wallet.
It is fully supported and well, if not controlled, then at least part of the funds goes to the family, not to the family, but specifically to Putin's inner circle.
But those aren't all the surprises of the week. In parallel with oil and logistics, Ukrainian birds are methodically burning out the brains of the Russian military-industrial complex. This week, the Belgorod State Technological University was ablaze.
That's, well, the place where they make unmanned aerial vehicles and teach how to operate them.
And also research and production complexes in Korolyov, near Moscow. And the facilities of the Kama oil plant in Perm. And that's far from all. The occupiers in the temporarily seized territories can't sleep peacefully either. This is what the remains of a Russian military base in the Luhansk region look like now. It turns out the Kremlin is simply incapable of protecting every warehouse, factory, or research center at the same time. The Russian air defense system is bursting at the seams.
Such a campaign, it has a dual effect. We are not only striking a specific target, but also forcing the enemy to stretch their defense system and redeploy resources.
And ahead, the enemy faces new surprises that our defenders have already marked in detail on their operational maps.
There will definitely be strikes on energy exports. This means oil refineries, port infrastructure for oil exports, grain export facilities, and the chemical industry. Well, I mean, they are one of the world's largest producers of mineral fertilizers, and they will continue to strike the logistics centers of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, with the start of the heating season, I am more than certain that there will be strikes on thermal power plants and combined heat and power plants, meaning everything necessary for electricity generation and heat production.
The 40-day marathon has shown systematic long-range sanctions from the SBU and the defense forces have become a strategy. Autumn's ahead, a new heating season, and even more surprises for the Russian rear. So, Russian cities should get ready. The so-called Special Military Operation Plan seems to be entering a phase where absolutely everything will burn. Sophia Cholos, Facts of the Week, ICTV, United News.
Open fire on this position, a slap in the face to Russia. That is how local pro-Kremlin politicians interpreted President Zelensky's visit to Serbia. It also flared up powerfully in Moscow since Serbia has long been in its orbit, even though it tries not to quarrel with Brussels. The country officially condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but refuses to join the sanctions imposed by the European Union against Moscow. At the same time, this year President Vučić moved closer to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and now the first visit to Belgrade. Within its framework, they discussed expanding cooperation. Serbia promised to allocate 2 million euros for preparing Ukraine's energy sector for winter and to take on the reconstruction of one of our cities. But the global result of the visit to a country long considered pro-Russian, of course, lies in the geopolitical plane. It was in Belgrade that President Zelenskyy announced the important news that the U.S. would indeed provide Ukraine with missiles for Patriot systems. Experts believe that Kyiv bargained for them in exchange for a promise not to strike foreign vessels transporting Kazakh oil. Washington had requested this, but the number of interceptor missiles will still be small, and this will not be enough for full-scale protection against ballistic missiles. Putin, unfortunately, understands this perfectly well and is cynically using this window of opportunity. On Sunday night, there was another massive air attack. In Kharkiv, the Russians hit a high-rise building. People died, but Russia's main target was Odessa and the Odessa region. Unfortunately, not a single missile was shot down again. Therefore, the primary and most urgent task today is the search for Patriot interceptors, our own anti-ballistic defense, and forcing Putin into a peace agreement before the start of winter. How realistic is all of this? Serhiy Wenzel looked into it.
The mission is to destroy ballistic missile launchers. Will a new Ukrainian tactic be able to knock the missile trump card out of Putin's hands? To what extent will launchers from the DPRK strengthen Russia's ballistic fist? And when will Ukrainian ballistics fly toward Moscow?
That'll have a really great effect.
A spectacular fireworks display worth millions of dollars. This is the moment an S-400 Triumph launcher was destroyed near occupied Kerch in Crimea. The Russians keep these systems not only to protect their own skies, but also for dirty strikes on Ukrainian cities. The night of August 5th became a living hell for Kyiv. The capital was struck by hypersonic Iskanders, S-400 anti-aircraft missiles, and North Korean potassium nitride 23s. 17 people were killed and 44 were wounded. Due to the lack of interceptor missiles against this brute force, Ukraine is looking for other methods.
The military knows that they need to destroy the enemy's launchers, thereby reducing strikes on Ukraine, because these are on strategically important infrastructure and on the civilian population. Military and civilian, of course, they are dealing with this and will continue to do so.
But will it be possible to stop the ballistic terror in this way? Presidential advisor Serhiy Flash-Beskrasnov says that destroying the launchers is an extremely difficult task.
First of all, the Russians are currently finding so-called blind spots in the satellite coverage of our Western partners, and they are working accordingly in those zones. The time for deployment and packing up to the point of firing is like 5 minutes for them. And with the march, usually from the shelter where they are located, it's currently estimated to be up to 20 minutes.
Furthermore, Flash says, the Russians know the maximum range of Ukrainian HIMARs and deliberately fire from a distance of about 1 to 150 kilometers from the border, which is out of reach for this weapon. Therefore, it is necessary to target the Iskanders with other types of weaponry, and for this, aerial reconnaissance and satellite imagery are required. So how do we combat their elusiveness and speed of deployment? Our military has options. The first, keep Western aircraft in the air equipped with long-range air-to-ground missiles capable of reacting in a free hunt mode.
For this, we have a certain portion of our aviation in these zones that faces moments where there's a risk of shelling. You know, like being in the airspace on a constant combat alert mode. And accordingly, if they receive data that a launcher is coming out, they essentially engage it.
With drones that could destroy launchers on the territory of the Russian Federation, the situation's more complicated because Starlink, which successfully helps destroy launchers in the temporarily occupied territories, does not work there. But destroying the launchers directly is only one option for fighting Russian ballistics. Now we will tell you about others. A reliable tool is our own ballistic missile program. Ukrainian designers are already finalizing the fluorine monophosphide 7 missile. Tests are ongoing, and in military circles there are increasingly loud hints about the first combat use of the domestic Sapsin system. All this weaponry is needed for a very specific reactive task.
If we had our own short-range ballistic missiles, like the FP7, we could react quickly to conduct this kind of ballistic counter-battery warfare.
Another tool, Ukraine, together with Western partners, is deploying the domestic anti-missile project Freya.
Anti-ballistics is just defense, which doesn't provide, again, 100%. It will never provide 100% effect.
That is exactly why Ukraine is simultaneously using another tactic, striking at the very sources of the threat. Ukrainian long-range drones and missiles are increasingly striking the facilities where Russian ballistics are born. Bryansk, Izhevsk, Kolumna, Vatkinsk are just some of the cities. Ukraine has imposed its own sanctions against the Russian military-industrial complex. These strikes have already slowed down production at certain plants. However, Russia is still capable of producing dozens of ballistic missiles every month.
The latest data was 70 to 75 hypersonic ones, and now there was information about 35 to 40 per month. The question is that these could have been produced from components that were manufactured beforehand. And so an even longer period of time is needed to understand when they will exhaust their stockpiles of components.
To cover his own failures and strengthen his ballistic fist, Putin enlisted North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Ukrainian intelligence is already recording the appearance of potassium nitride 23 and potassium nitride 24 systems in the Voronezh region.
This is an additional resource. Plus, within the framework of the partnership between Russia and North Korea wants to train its military to fight with ballistic missiles in practice. And the practice, unfortunately, is our territory.
Of course, there is another tool to push partners for at least some number of interceptors for Patriot.
Who has anti-ballistic missiles and the system? The manufacturer, which is primarily the United States of America. Can they help? We are working on it. Will they be allocating missiles to us every month? Yes, we have agreements. Are these missiles enough? No.
Such a deficit forces us to scrape together whatever we can from everywhere. Right now, according to Zelenskyy, Ukraine is conducting difficult negotiations with Europe, Poland, Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia to find at least some available interceptors. It is worth mentioning that a few months ago, Ukraine was counting on receiving an American license to produce interceptor missiles, but the process suddenly stalled. So why did the Allies hit the Bruniks?
This means that there is no political decision for the United States export control system to grant permission to begin the process. In other words, no processes have started yet and no working groups have been working. And it turns out the United States is thinking about it. It's interesting. What are they thinking about if the Patriot is exclusively a defensive weapon?
Without a green light from Washington, forcing the Kremlin to stop is an almost impossible task. However, the White House seems to be playing its own game.
Without the United States, forcing Putin to end this war is impossible a priori. But Donald Trump does not want to spoil his relationship with his friend Putin. Moreover, as long as he is just as convinced as Putin that he can peel Russia away from China, he won't go for it.
Be that as it may, experts agree that having one's own ballistics is one of the most effective tools, and it shouldn't be aimed at the Kremlin. Dozens of design bureaus and defense plants are concentrated in Moscow and the Moscow region. They are the very things that could become the argument that the Kremlin will no longer be able to ignore.
Within Moscow itself, there's been a huge number of very large, serious defense enterprises since Soviet times. For example, I can tell you that the headquarters and main design bureau of Sukhoi and MiG are located there. To strike it, it's within the second garden ring of Moscow, meaning it's a legitimate military target, military production. That would have a very great effect.
Because an aggressor only starts speaking the language of diplomacy when they lose the ability to dictate terms by force on the battlefield.
Everything is being decided right now. The main focus is on the air war, and we hope that Ukraine will get its own ballistics, will be able to get, we hope also, its own interceptor missiles. And accordingly, in this way, these are serious arguments for starting real peace negotiations.
The Kremlin loves to repeat that time is on Russia's side, but that's only true as long as their ballistics launch with impunity. But if every such launch costs Moscow its defense plants, design bureaus, and the launch systems themselves in the border areas, the Kremlin will lose its main argument of force. And only then will Putin sit down at the negotiating table. Serhiy Venedikt, Fakty Tizhnya, ICTV, United News. This is how you should hold naval parades, not in the back alleys of St. Petersburg next to painted submarines. A masterclass from the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, whose unmanned boats were prancing on the waves near temporarily occupied Yalta on the eve of City Day. And that is no coincidence. Before the annexation of Crimea, Ukrainian ships regularly entered Yalta Bay every second Saturday of August and moored near the central embankment. And now the time has come to restore an old tradition, which is exactly what the operators of Group 13 did by holding a parade of Magura combat platforms, reminding the occupiers that Crimea is Ukraine. And to drive the point home after the parade, the drones attacked an occupier facility in the port of Yalta. The whole city saw a beautiful pillar of black smoke.